Welcome to this presentation on performing cluster analysis with Python. The fundamental concepts of clustering are first introduced, followed by an implementation of the k-means algorithm using the scikit-learn library. The quality of the clustering results is then evaluated using the elbow method and the Silhouette analysis before the final clusters are compared with the patterns observed in the earlier principal component analysis. The wine dataset contains measurements from wines belonging to three different cultivars. In this presentation, the first two principal component scores obtained from the earlier PCA are used as the input for k-means clustering. The link to that video is provided at the end of this presentation as well as in the video description. In the previous video, we had seen how principal component analysis reducing the wine dataset to two principal components and revealing a visual pattern suggesting three groups. How to confirm if it is only three groups? This is done by using cluster analysis. Cluster analysis, which falls under unsupervised machine learning, is a technique that allows us to find groups of similar objects that are more related to each other than to objects in other groups. The goal is that objects within a group be similar to one another and different from objects in other groups. The greater the similarity or homogeneity within a group and greater the difference between groups, the clustering is better or more distinct. There are various ways to distinguish clustering, and one of it is hierarchical versus prototype. Hierarchical clustering. This clustering is nested where the clusters are permitted to have subclusters. This is the second most important category of clustering methods. The hierarchical clustering is often visualized using a tree-like diagram called a dendrogram. This can often help with interpretation of results by showing potential taxonomical relationships. There are two main approaches to hierarchical clustering. The first is divisive hierarchical clustering. Here, the algorithm starts with one cluster that encompasses the complete dataset, and each step, the cluster is iteratively split into smaller clusters until each cluster only contains one example. The second is agglomerative hierarchical clustering, in which the algorithm starts with the points as individual clusters or members and merge the closest pair of clusters. A notion of cluster proximity is needed for this. The two standard algorithms for agglomerative hierarchical clustering are single linkage and complete linkage. The figure shows a dendrogram from a study in which cluster analysis classified the studied almond cultivars into three groups. Prototype-based. Prototype-based clustering means that each cluster is represented by a prototype, which is usually either the centroid of similar points with continuous features or the medoid in the case of categorical features. It is a very good for spherical shaped clusters. One of the drawbacks of this clustering algorithm is that the number of clusters must be specified before the algorithm is run. The most popular prototype clustering is k-means. This is also a partitional algorithm because it partitions the dataset into a predefined number of non-overlapping clusters. The steps in the basic k-means algorithm are 1. Select k-points as centroids. 2. Form k-clusters by assigning each point to its closest centroid. 3. Recompute the centroid of each cluster. 4. Repeat steps 2 and 3 until centroids do not change. A proximity measure is needed to assign a point to the closest centroid. The Euclidean distance is often used and it is also used here. Usage of k-means. The example in this presentation uses the classic k-means clustering algorithm. The only enhancement is the use of k-means plus plus to choose better initial cluster centers. The first centroid is chosen randomly. Each subsequent centroid is chosen with higher probability if it is far from the existing centroids. Once initialized, the algorithm follows the standard k-means procedure of assigning points to the nearest centroid and updating the centroids iteratively until convergence. K-means plus plus avoids the problem of random initialization traps. You don't want different results just because of the initial random choice of centroids. Having discussed the basic concepts behind k-means clustering, we are now ready to implement the algorithm in Python. As mentioned earlier, this example continues from the principal component analysis presentation and uses the same wide data set. Specifically, we will use the first two principal component scores, PC1 and PC2, obtained from the earlier PCA projection. If you have not seen that presentation, you may find it useful to watch it first, as it explains how these principal components were generated. The implementation follows a straightforward sequence. First, we import the required libraries and the dataset. Now we perform k-means clustering by specifying an initial number of clusters based on prior knowledge. We then evaluate whether this choice is appropriate using the elbow method and the Silhouette score. Finally, we visualize the resulting results using the two principal components. This step-by-step workflow illustrates not only how to perform k-means clustering in Python, but also how to assess whether the resulting clusters provide a meaningful representation of the data. The diagram summarizes the step-by-step workflow used. The codes for running cluster analysis in PyCharm Professional is shown. The first step, as usual, involves importing the common libraries such as NumPy, Matplotlib, as well as Pandas. We are now ready to perform k-means clustering. The k-means class is imported from the cluster module of the scikit-learn package. Since our earlier principal component analysis suggested the presence of three groups, we begin by setting the number of clusters to 3 using the n clusters parameter. The random state parameter is specified so that the same initial conditions are used each time the code is run, making the results reproducible. By default, scikit-learn uses the k-means plus plus initiation method, which chooses more suitable starting centroids than purely random initialization. This generally leads to faster convergence and more stable clustering results. Finally, the fit predict method Both fits the k-means model to the data and assigns every sample to one of the three clusters. Recall from the previous presentation that principal component analysis transform the original variables into principal components. Here we use X-train reduced, which consists of the PC1 and PC2 scores from that earlier PCA projection as the input for the k-means clustering algorithm. K-means cluster centers returns the coordinates of the cluster centroids in the feature space used for clustering. The plot scatter function plots the samples belonging to each cluster. The expression y underscore pred equals 0, y underscore pred equals 1, and y underscore pred equals 2 select the observations assigned to clusters 2, 1, and 3 respectively, while the PC1 and PC2 scores define the x and y axis coordinates. The remaining parameters determine the appearance of the points and the legend. Remember that k-means returns cluster indices starting from 0 because Python uses zero-based indexing. The code for the elbow method is shown. Instead of fitting k-means algorithm only once, we fit it repeatedly using values of k ranging from 1 to 9. After each model is fitted, the inertia attribute is used to obtain the within cluster sum of squares or WCSS. This parameter is also called cluster inertia. The graphical tool, the so-called elbow method, is used to estimate the optimal number of clusters K. The elbow technique for choosing the best value for the number of clusters is times rather cost. The point at which elbow occurs is not very clear. A more precise approach is to use the Silhouette score. To compute the Silhouette score, the scikit-learn's Silhouette score function is used. The initial cluster plot obtained using k equals 3 is shown. Each point represents a sample and the stars indicate the cluster centroids. Although the clusters appear to be reasonably well separated, visual inspection alone is not sufficient to determine whether 3 is the optimum number of clusters. The next steps will use the elbow method and Silhouette analysis to evaluate this objectively. The elbow plot shows that the optimum number of clusters is 3. The Silhouette score confirms that k equals 3 is the best choice for number of clusters. The next choice is 4, which was not evident from the elbow plot. For simplicity, the code used to generate the Silhouette diagrams was not included here. Instead, we will focus on interpreting the results. Each panel represents a different number of clusters and each colored region corresponds to one cluster. Wider regions indicate better defined clusters while the red dashed lines show the average Silhouette score. Comparing these diagrams, the three cluster solution appears to provide the best clustering performance. The comparison between the principal component plot and the k-means clustering is shown. In the PC plot, the known class information is used only to color the samples for visualization and was not used during the principal component analysis itself. Likewise, the class labels were not provided to the k-means algorithm during clustering. Despite this, k-means was able to group most of the samples according to their original classes. Only one known sample from class 2 was assigned to cluster 3, while three samples from class 2 were grouped in the region associated with class 1. Overall, the clustering results closely resemble the known class structure of the wine dataset. Like any other statistical technique, k-means cluster analysis has its advantages and limitations. It is a simple and efficient algorithm, but it has difficulty handling non-globular clusters or clusters of different sizes and densities. This technique also has trouble clustering data that contains outliers. Another disadvantage is that it is also restricted to data that has a notion of a center. Conclusion and next steps. K-means is a powerful starting point for discovering hidden patterns in data, but it is only one of the many clustering techniques available. The choice of algorithm depends on the characteristics of the dataset and the questions being investigated. The goal is not merely to learn an algorithm or programming language, but to use them to communicate ideas, answer research questions, and discover meaningful insights from data. In the future presentations, hierarchical clustering and other machine learning techniques will be explored to better understand when each method is most appropriate. Thank you for your time. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep turning data into knowledge.